Murakin was now sniffing around almost like a hunting beast that had found a trail after ages of silence. "Where is it coming from?" he muttered, searching for the source. Then he stopped and fixed his gaze on Jean. "Here. It's coming from here." At that moment, a bold idea suddenly formed in Jean Runcandle's mind. It was reckless, but it might also be his best chance. "Should I try it?" he wondered. Then Jean forced a small smile and called out carefully, "Sir Murakin." Murakin turned back to look at him, and his expression changed into something almost gleeful, as if he sensed Jean knew more than he had first let on. "Oh, that's right," Murakin said. "You know something, don't you?" Without hesitating any longer, Jean Runcandle immediately released his shadow power. A sphere of dark energy bloomed in his hand as he asked, "Can you tell me about this? My father said this power comes from the god of shadows, Sodaret." The instant Murakin clearly saw the sphere of shadow energy in the boy's hand, he froze completely. For a full 5 seconds, he did not move at all, as if his mind had gone blank from sheer disbelief. Then his whole body trembled, and he shouted as if he could not accept what he was seeing. "Hey, Sodaret, are you joking with me? Are you serious? Is this some kind of sick joke?" His voice cracked with shock, and the more Murakin spoke, the more miserable he looked. His strength seemed to drain out of him until he collapsed to the ground, devastated in a way that almost looked ridiculous. Like someone who had held in resentment for 1,000 long years, he looked ready to cry without even having tears left. "After all this time, it's this little child?" he muttered in despair. Jean Runcandle said nothing. He simply stood there and silently watched the enormous man in front of him twist, groan, and shout in disbelief, unsure whether he was witnessing a dragon's breakdown or the beginning of something far more dangerous. Suddenly, their eyes met. Murakin, who had looked so overwhelming only moments ago, awkwardly lowered his head, as if even he felt strange about the situation. "Hey kid," he muttered. Jean Runcandle answered at once, trying to stay respectful despite the absurdity of it all. "Yes, Sir Murakin. I'm listening." Murakin wore the miserable expression of someone who had just realized life had become much more troublesome than expected. "Listen," he said with a long, bitter sigh. "I once made a promise to Sodaret, and it looks like if I'm going to keep that promise, I'll have to work with you from now on." "It's me." Jean Runcandle stood frozen where he was, unable to respond right away. A promise made to Sodaret was already shocking enough, but hearing that he himself was tied to it made his mind go blank for a moment. Murakin continued in a surprisingly serious tone. "I'll explain the details later. I only just woke up, so my head is still a mess, and honestly, you're so young that you probably wouldn't understand everything yet anyway." Even so, there was no hesitation in his voice when it came to the matter itself. "But even so, I should properly introduce myself to Sodaret's contractor, shouldn't I?" After saying that, Murakin rose to his full height and transformed into the majestic form of a black dragon, so powerful that the whole chamber seemed to shrink around him. "I am Murakin, Sodaret's representative, his friend, and the last descendant of the first shadow creature. According to the 1,000-year agreement, I will accompany you from this day forward." Jean Runcandle's eyes widened so much they almost seemed ready to break. He could hardly believe the scene unfolding right in front of him. Everything happening felt too unbelievable, too sudden, almost like he had stepped into a legend instead of reality. "Accompany me?" Jean repeated inwardly in disbelief. Murakin, still in the form of the massive black dragon, lowered his gaze toward him and spoke again, this time with much more weight. "Enough of that. Tell me your name properly, contractor of Sodaret." Jean Runcandle looked straight into Murakin's eyes, and for the first time since the dragon had awakened, a victorious smile spread across his face. He stepped forward and placed his hand against Murakin, accepting the moment as if sealing a new chapter with his own will. "My name is Jean Runcandle," he said clearly, his voice steady and proud. "I am the 13th child and the youngest son of the Runcandle clan." He introduced himself without fear, as though declaring his place before fate itself. The dark, storm-filled sky seemed almost fitting for the thought that followed. Murakin, the Black Dragon. Mount Murakin. Even the land of raging winds had once been named after this very dragon, a creature whose existence had been carved so deeply into history that the world itself still carried traces of his name. Long ago, the black dragon Muraken had ruled this region with terrifying power. But 1,000 years earlier, he had been defeated in battle by Timar Runcandle, and from that moment on, his legend had changed from one of dominance to one of silence. History recorded that after Storm Castle was destroyed, Muraken had fallen into a long hibernation. But as Jean Runcandle thought about it now, standing face to face with the dragon himself, he quietly told himself, no, that was never the full truth. That version of history was only the founder's official explanation, wrapped neatly in the story of a so-called guardian dragon. It was the kind of truth noble clans allowed the world to know, while the real details remained hidden beneath the surface. Those who formed contracts with gods were said to work together with the clan's guardian dragon. But because almost no information remained about Sodaret's side of that story, there were still too many missing pieces. Too much about Muraken's existence, role, and purpose remained unclear. Jean Runcandle continued thinking it through in silence. So can I take it this way? He wondered. Because Muraken was sleeping, I never had a guardian dragon before. The thought was slow and careful, but once it began, it refused to stop. And now that Muraken has awakened, Jin's breath caught slightly as the conclusion finally hit him. Does that mean I have a guardian dragon now too? The realization stunned him so much that he stood there speechless for a moment. Muraken was there waiting when Jean returned again. Oh, you're here, the dragon said, sounding oddly cheerful. Jean Runcandle, meanwhile, stood there a bit awkwardly, holding the food Gilly McLaurin had prepared for him. My nanny packed some food for me to bring, he explained, still not entirely used to how casually he was now meeting a black dragon in secret. As Jean Runcandle looked at Muraken, he thought that since they would be spending time together for the next several days, this was the perfect chance to ask all the things he had been curious about. Weeks had already passed with Muraken hidden inside the secret library. Then, right in the middle of chewing on a piece of cake, Muraken suddenly asked, why did I fight Timar Runcandle anyway? Muraken lazily stretched out on the ground and answered his own question with complete indifference. How am I supposed to remember something from 1,000 years ago? Hearing that, Jean Runcandle became certain of one thing about him. Before he could think further, Muraken interrupted again, still focused on the dessert. Anyway, is this all the strawberry cake there is? Jean sighed and shook his head. That stupid strawberry cake, he thought bitterly, while Muraken counted under his breath. 1, 2, 3. Why are there only 7 pieces? It was obvious where the dragon's mind truly was. After finishing the cake, Muraken licked the last trace of sweetness away and looked toward Jean Runcandle. So what exactly do you do when you come here? He asked. Jean gently placed a hand on the book beside him and replied, I take notes. I bring blank journals and copy down the contents of the secret records hidden here. Muraken blinked and tilted his head. Huh, really? So you actually understand some of it? He asked, sounding more curious than mocking. Jean let out a small sigh before answering honestly. About 30%, maybe. The rest still goes over my head. Muraken casually waved a hand, as if trying to brush away Jin's frustration. Don't lose heart, he said. For a child your age, that's already overwhelming enough. Most kids wouldn't understand any of it at all, let alone 30%. They'd be too lazy to even try, Muraken added with a snort. That would be normal for an ordinary child. Jean lowered his head slightly, then answered in a firm voice, but I'm a Runcandle. This level is normal for me. I have 12 brothers and sisters, and above them are my parents and the elders of the clan. If I want to surpass them, or wipe out the obstacles ahead of me, Jean Runcandle continued, his tone turning colder, then I have no choice but to work much harder than everyone else. There was no childish pride in those words, only sharp determination. Muraken looked at him with a strange expression, as if wondering how much of the founder's spirit was hidden inside this little boy. He seemed to be measuring Jean against someone from a much older time, not merely judging him as a child reading a difficult book. Jean Runcandle sank deeper into thought. If I compare myself to the strongest human in history, he wondered inwardly, how far away am I really? How much do I measure up at this point? The question weighed on him more heavily than he wanted to admit. Then Muraken suddenly spoke, cutting into his thoughts. At your age, Timar Runcandle probably wouldn't have understood even a single line in that book, he said in a matter-of-fact tone that made Jean lift his head at once. Murakin settled down and spoke like an old man giving a lesson. But theory isn't everything. Timar didn't bury himself in books, and he still became an incredible fighter. You have potential like Timar did, but you're not the same as Timar. Those words hit Jean hard enough to make his pupils tremble. He immediately asked, "Then, does that mean I can never become like the founder?" Murakin answered with a simple, blunt, "No." That vague reply only confused Jean Runcandle further, and he had no choice but to look up and wait for a real explanation. Murakin finally explained, "You are Soderet's contractor, just like Timar Runcandle was, and you're smart enough to understand these books too. You're still young, so don't rush everything. Just keep training properly, all right?" Then he rubbed Jin's head so hard it almost felt like punishment and added, "You can become as strong as Timar. And who knows, maybe you'll even surpass him one day." Jean Runcandle turned sharply, eyes bright with sudden hope. "Really?" he asked at once. Murakin replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Of course, kid. Do you even know Soderet's nickname?" Jean hesitated, then answered honestly, unsure of where this was going. "No, I don't know." Then, as if the very air responded to the question, a dark hand seemed to appear and close around tiny planets like a fist around a galaxy. Murakin's voice echoed slowly and heavily. "It is infinity. Soderet's power has no end, which means the one who carries his contract has no fixed limit either. So don't get discouraged," Murakin said, his tone turning unexpectedly encouraging. "Believe in yourself. And since you look like you need it, I'll teach you a new special move to cheer you up." There was a grin in his voice now, the kind that made trouble sound inevitable. Then Murakin slapped Jean Runcandle so hard on the back that the boy nearly stumbled forward and cried out in pain. "What was that for?" Jean shouted, glaring at him through the sting. Murakin acted as if nothing unusual had happened and calmly gave his answer. "That," he said, "was about releasing shadow energy." Jean Runcandle frowned, still not understanding, and repeated the words back to him. "Releasing shadow energy?" Murakin nodded and replied, "That's right. Exactly that. All creatures that use shadow energy have to get used to this process," Murakin explained. "It is both the beginning and the end of shadow energy. But if you try to learn it carelessly or the wrong way, it can become extremely dangerous." His tone made it clear that this was no joke. "So learn it slowly, and learn it seriously," Murakin warned. But instead of feeling intimidated, Jean Runcandle's eyes lit up with excitement. "All right," he said immediately. "I'll do it. So, Murakin, what do I need to do first?" Murakin looked him over and thought for a moment. He said. First, you need to learn how to unlock your mana properly." Jean did not understand and asked again, "Unlock my mana? What?" Even as he asked, a thought flashed through his mind. "I've done things like that countless times in my previous life." Murakin went on to explain. "Releasing shadow energy is all about unlocking and moving your mana. You need to master both of those things first. From here on, you'll probably have to train this for 2 or 3 years before it becomes natural." Jean Runcandle almost doubted his own ears. 2 or 3 years, he thought in disbelief. To him, that sounded unbearably slow, especially with everything he wanted to accomplish. Murakin only shrugged as if Jin's reaction was nothing unusual. "You don't even know the fundamentals yet," he said. "So I can't just jump ahead and teach you advanced things right away." "To be more precise," Murakin added, speaking more carefully now, "the next thing you really need to learn is how to move your mana freely and correctly. Without that, nothing else matters." Jean Runcandle quietly raised one hand and let a blue flame-like current gather above it. Then he looked up and asked, "Like this? Can you teach me now?" There was a hint of confidence in the way he said it. Murakin stared at him in total shock, as if he had just witnessed something that should not have been possible. His whole body stiffened, and then he trembled. What? How did you do that?" he demanded. Jean answered with surprising modesty. "I've been able to do it for a while now." Murakin just kept muttering to himself, still unable to recover from what he had seen. His expression looked like someone whose common sense had just been overturned. "Impossible," he whispered, then said it again with more force. "You already know how to move mana?" He sounded less like a teacher and more like a man personally offended by the speed of Jin's growth. Seeing that Murakin still did not believe him, Jin Runcandle deliberately demonstrated it. He moved the mana from one hand to the other with a smooth, showy motion, making it clear that he was not bluffing. Murakin could only stare in disbelief as the proof unfolded right in front of him. "Oh my God," Murakin finally muttered, letting out a long sigh of pure astonishment. "Only a genius among geniuses could do that. You really are an extraordinary kid, aren't you?" Even he sounded half defeated by it. "All right then," Murakin said at last, finally accepting reality. "In that case, I'll teach you how to release shadow energy." Jin Runcandle quietly looked pleased with himself and thought, with no small amount of satisfaction, "Good. It worked." Then Murakin answered in a low, steady voice, his tone suddenly far more solemn than before. "All right, listen carefully. Shadow energy is born from darkness itself, and every darkness that exists in this world traces its origin back to Sodaret. The shadows are already spreading into every corner of the world," he continued, his words carrying a strange, ancient weight. "That is why Sodaret is the lord of all shadows in existence. And if you are his sole contractor, then that means your place is not small either." At that very moment, a black shadow silently crept beneath Jin Runcandle's feet, making him tense in alarm. The darkness thickened in an instant, surging forward with a sudden force that made the air feel colder and heavier around him. Then the darkness gradually swallowed the corner of the room whole, like ink spreading over paper. Murakin calmly continued his explanation, as if the unnerving sight was the most natural thing in the world. "In other words," he said, "you, too, can become a master of every shadow in this world." The final words hung in the air with chilling clarity, making the idea feel far more real than Jin Runcandle was prepared for. "So," Murakin asked with a crooked smirk, clearly amused by Jin's reaction, "what do you think, kid?" There was challenge, pride, and a little mockery all mixed into the look on his face. "This," Murakin said, spreading the darkness wider around them, "is the release of shadow energy." Jin Runcandle stood stunned, then instinctively turned his head. In the next instant, the scene seemed to shift in his mind like a flash of memory or vision. A violent shock tore through the edge of a forest, and a massive dragon crashed down before a silver-haired girl. One of the arriving soldiers quickly reported, "Lady Luna, this side has been cleared. Once we clear the remaining 5 sectors, the mission will be complete." Luna Runcandle turned back slightly and replied in a calm, soft voice, "Good. A few months should be more than enough. Tell the knights to rest," Luna Runcandle added. Then her gaze drifted away, sinking into deeper thought as though something else occupied her mind. In the distance, a cry of pain echoed faintly through the air, but Luna remained completely unmoved. After a pause, she added, "One more thing." The soldier, unsure of what was coming next, quickly answered, "Yes, my lady." "What is it?" Luna Runcandle asked in an unexpectedly casual tone. "What is a 9-year-old boy usually like?" The question was so out of place that it left the soldier momentarily speechless. Half a year had passed since Jin Runcandle first met Murakin, and by then the Tana twins were finally leaving Storm Castle. Daytona Runcandle waved on the way out and called, "We're going now. See you later." Jin answered from home, "Yeah, take care." Then silence settled over the place again. Jin Runcandle drifted into a quiet moment of thought, only to hear someone suddenly call out, "Young master." He turned back in mild confusion, not immediately understanding what was going on. Gilly McLaurin stood there cheerfully holding a birthday cake. "Happy 9th birthday," she said brightly. Only then did Jin Runcandle blink and realize what day it was. "My 9th birthday," he thought, quietly counting the time that had passed. Jin Runcandle looked genuinely stunned for a moment, then smiled with clear happiness. "Thank you, everyone." "Gilly, could you share the cake with the others?" he asked warmly. Gilly McLaurin answered just as softly, "Of course, young master." While they were still speaking, someone called out from a short distance away, "Young Master Jin." Jin turned at once. Khan was standing there with his head lowered, wearing an uncharacteristically guilty expression. "I'm sorry for interrupting so suddenly, young master," he said. Jin asked at once, "What is it?" Khan began to answer, But before he could say much more, a white-haired woman entered with a quiet, composed presence. As she drew closer, her long, beautiful silver-white hair seemed to catch all the light around her. Khan, half breathless from the pressure of her presence, finished his sentence. Lady Luna Runcandle has come to visit. The moment those words left his mouth, both Gilly McLaurin and Jean Runcandle froze in shock. Neither of them could quite believe what they had just heard. Jean Runcandle immediately thought of who she was. Luna Runcandle, the first flag-bearer of Runcandle and a 9-star knight. The eldest among the 13 siblings. The white whale of Runcandle, a figure so overwhelming that even within the clan, her name stood apart. Although she was the strongest among the Runcandle siblings, Luna Runcandle had never shown the slightest interest in becoming patriarch. Because of that, she had stepped away from the filthy swamp of the succession struggle on her own terms. She truly was like a lone white whale, distant from everyone else. And for that exact reason, Luna Runcandle had never really paid any attention to her younger siblings. As far as Jean Runcandle was concerned, their relationship was closer to that of strangers than family. That was how distant they had always been. That was the kind of distance between them. And yet this older sister had suddenly come all the way to Storm Castle without any prior word or warning. Jean Runcandle could not help wondering if something serious had happened within the clan. If that was not the reason, then another possibility rose in his mind at once. Did she somehow find out that I've been going into the secret library? The thought made his nerves tighten immediately. Still, Jean Runcandle forced himself not to let suspicion swallow his judgment. He steadied his breathing and kept his reason in place instead of letting his imagination run wild. "Sister Luna?" Jean asked carefully. Luna Runcandle answered in a soft, almost gentle voice. "You've grown a lot, little one." Jean, caught off guard by her tone, replied shyly, "If I had known you were coming, I would have dressed more properly to greet you." For a brief moment, Luna Runcandle looked as if she might melt from the sweetness of the remark. "What kind words?" she said with faint amusement. "Does an older sister need to formally announce a visit to her youngest brother?" Hearing that, Jean Runcandle could barely believe his own ears. Then Luna Runcandle studied his face more closely and said, "But you look pale. You don't seem well." As she spoke, she gently knelt down and placed her hands on his shoulders so she could get a better look at him up close. Jean Runcandle was visibly startled by the sudden closeness and quickly answered, "No, it's nothing serious. I'm just a little nervous." Luna lifted one brow at that, and Jean lowered his voice slightly as he added, "This is the first time I've ever been this close to you. I don't know why, but it makes me anxious." Luna Runcandle paused, then asked again in a quieter voice, as if making sure she had heard him correctly. "You're anxious?" she repeated. Then her expression sank into a deep, dark kind of thought, as if those simple words had struck some hidden place in her mind. The custom of the Runcandle clan was cruel from the beginning. Siblings were raised to watch one another, deceive one another, and when necessary, trample each other down without hesitation. That brutal tradition shaped every relationship in the family. Did she come here to test me? Jean Runcandle wondered silently. But then, without warning, Luna Runcandle slowly clenched her iron-gloved hand, and something about her expression shifted in a way he did not expect. She fell silent for a moment, as if unsure how she should face him after hearing that answer. At last Luna Runcandle spoke, her voice much quieter than before. "Yes, it seems I wasn't considerate enough." Jean Runcandle looked up at her in confusion, unable to follow what had changed so suddenly in her mood. "How strange," Luna Runcandle murmured, clearly troubled by herself. "You may still be young, but I forgot that you are also the youngest son of the Runcandle clan." Her voice carried real regret, not empty formality. Then she spoke plainly, with visible remorse in her expression. "I'm sorry." The apology was so sincere that it felt more shocking than anything else she had said so far. And she did not stop at mere words. Luna Runcandle even lowered herself further, kneeling properly to show that she meant the apology with full sincerity. "Little Jean," she said with an extremely gentle expression, "there is something I want to speak to you about in private. Would you mind dismissing your nanny and bodyguard for a little while?" Her tone was calm and kind, almost unbelievably so. "She wants to speak with me alone?" Jean Runcandle thought. Not wanting to keep her waiting any longer, he answered without delay. Yes, sister. Even as he replied, his thoughts continued racing. I still don't know why she came, he thought. But at least it doesn't seem like this is something bad. Luna Runcandle then looked at him kindly, as if encouraging him to stay calm. Jean, my youngest brother, Luna Runcandle began, her voice serious now. The reason I came to see you so suddenly is because there is something important I need to tell you. Jean Runcandle answered at once, giving her his full attention. What is it? He asked. Luna Runcandle recalled the matter and replied. The last time father came to see you, the way you handled yourself caught the attention of the other children. That means that by the time you leave Storm Castle, all of your brothers and sisters will already be watching you closely. As she said that, Luna Runcandle gently placed her hand over Jean Runcandle's, as if trying to soften the weight of the warning she was giving him. Then her face grew even more serious. But little one, she said, I truly hope you do not lose your own happiness by throwing yourself into the clan's struggle. Every word came from a place of real concern. I sincerely hope, Luna Runcandle continued, that you will not be wounded by the cruel traditions of the Runcandle clan. It was not just advice. It sounded like the heartfelt wish of someone who had seen too much already. Jean Runcandle was stunned. For a moment he could not fully understand what she meant, or why she was saying such things to him now of all times. Then he worked it out for himself. So that's really the reason she gave up the position of patriarch, he thought. It was that simple, after all. The realization carried both clarity and unease. If she truly didn't want me dragged into rivalry with my siblings, Jean Runcandle thought, then why didn't she warn me even once in my previous life? The bitter question rose naturally. Was it because I wasn't worth speaking to back then? Or because none of the others ever saw me as a rival in the first place? Then he answered aloud, Sister Luna, I'm grateful for your concern, but I have absolutely no intention of staying out of this fight. Jean Runcandle's voice was not loud, but it was firm enough to leave no room for misunderstanding. He had made up his mind long ago. Luna Runcandle's gaze sharpened with seriousness. Jean, I mean this, she said, her voice heavy and sincere. I'm not saying it simply because one day you may have to stand against me. Please understand, sister. I know you mean well, but I've already lived through an assassination attempt. The moment Jean Runcandle said those words, Luna Runcandle's face darkened at once. Her eyes sharpened, and in a cold, controlled voice, she asked, Then what happened after that? Jean Runcandle continued without looking away from her. That's exactly why I can't step away from this struggle, he said firmly. There's no path left for me that doesn't lead through it. His answer was calm, but the resolve in it did not waver even a little. At those words, a fierce wave of energy rose from Luna Runcandle like a storm breaking loose. Her anger spilled into the room so sharply that the air itself seemed to grow heavy. She demanded to know who would dare attempt something like that inside Storm Castle of all places. A suffocating wave of indignation filled Jean Runcandle's room as Luna Runcandle's fury flared almost beyond control. For a brief moment, she looked less like a noble sister and more like a beast enraged beyond reason by the thought of harm coming to him. Her voice turned cold and cutting as she pressed the question again. Who was brazen enough to try to kill you in a place like this? The disbelief in her tone was almost as intense as her rage. Tell me, Jean, Luna Runcandle said, staring straight at him. Who wanted you dead? There was no softness in her voice now, only sharp concern and furious intent. Jean Runcandle answered carefully, though there was still tension in his face. I can't confirm that yet, he admitted. To be honest, I still haven't been able to identify the person behind it. It clearly frustrated him, but he refused to pretend he knew more than he did. Still, Jean added, trying to ease her anger at least a little. Even though someone tried to get rid of me, I'm all right now. As you can see, I'm standing here just fine, sister. He spoke lightly, but the memory behind those words was not light at all. Luna Runcandle gripped both of his arms tightly, her expression full of pain. Not all of your siblings hate you, she said, as if she needed him to know that more than anything else. Thank you for telling me this. I'm truly glad you did. Even so, sorrow lingered heavily in her eyes. Jean, my little brother, she whispered, and then suddenly pulled him into a tight embrace. Jean Runcandle froze in disbelief at what was happening. Luna's voice trembled with pain as she held him. This means you've already been dragged into the family war. It hurts me more than I can say. Jean Runcandle slowly returned the embrace, though part of him was still stunned. I never expected Sister Luna to be this warm, he thought honestly. Then, in a gentle attempt to comfort her, he softly patted her shoulder. Don't be sad, Jean Runcandle said quietly. His voice was soft, but sincere. After letting herself sink into that sorrow for a brief moment, Luna finally loosened her hold and drew back. Then Luna Runcandle lightly ruffled Jin's hair and forced a calmer expression onto her face. Yes, she said, taking a breath. Today is supposed to be a happy day. We shouldn't spend your birthday talking only about things like this. Today is your birthday, Luna Runcandle continued, her voice gentler now. And I actually came here because I wanted to give you a gift. As she said that, she slowly pulled a small wooden box from inside her pocket and held it out toward him. Then Luna opened the wooden box, and inside lay an exquisite necklace centered around a deep green gem. Even at a glance, it was obvious that this was no ordinary accessory. The stone carried a quiet beauty and an unusual presence. Jean Runcandle stared at it in surprise. A necklace? He asked, clearly caught off guard. Luna Runcandle gave a small nod and said, Would you turn around for me? Jean answered politely at once. Yes, sister. Luna stepped closer and fastened the necklace around his neck with careful hands. Then she said kindly, If you ever face something you can't handle on your own, break the green gem on this necklace. The moment you do, Luna Runcandle said in a firm, steady voice, I will come to you, no matter where you are. There was not the slightest doubt in the promise she made. So make sure you always wear it, she finished. Happy 9th birthday, Jean. Deeply moved, Jean Runcandle lowered his head slightly and answered, Thank you, sister. Just then, Gilly McLaurin arrived carrying a freshly cut slice of cake for Luna as well. For a while, the two siblings shared the cake together, even feeding each other in a scene so warm and intimate that it felt almost unreal within the harsh world of Runcandle. Gilly McLaurin found herself quietly moved by the sight of such genuine affection between brother and sister. After spending a little more time together and eating cake, Luna Runcandle finally rose to leave. It's getting late, she said softly. I should go now. Jean answered cheerfully. Yes, take care, sister. Later, when Jean returned to Muraken, the dragon was already waiting with obvious impatience. Hey, you're finally here, Muraken said. Then his eyes narrowed toward Jin's neck. Who gave you that thing you're wearing? Jean Runcandle replied simply. It was a birthday gift. Muraken visibly stiffened, then raised a finger toward the pendant with a startled look that was almost comical. The person who gave you that must care about you a great deal, Muraken said seriously. Jean, who still did not fully understand its value, blinked and asked, What is it? Muraken stared at the necklace and answered in a grave tone. That's one of the relics left behind by the Demon King Orgel. More than 1,000 years ago, countless people risked their lives just to get their hands on even one of his relics. Jean Runcandle asked in surprise, Is it really that amazing? Muraken immediately replied, Of course it is. It gives the wearer resistance against magic attacks of 5-star level and below, and it also increases the wearer's magical power. On top of that, I'm guessing it has a summoning function too. Seeing Muraken explain all of that so naturally, Jean said, You know a lot about it. Muraken looked away and answered, Well, that's because I lived in the same era as that thing's owner. He was famous enough. Then he glanced back at the pendant and added, And this belongs to that powerful presence who came here earlier, doesn't it? Jean handed Muraken a piece of cake and replied, Yes. My eldest sister stopped by. Wait a second, Jean added, suddenly realizing something. You could feel her energy all the way from here. Muraken gave an easy shrug and answered, Well, your sister probably felt me too. Hearing that, Jean Runcandle's eyes widened in alarm. What? He asked loudly. Then, does that mean she might tell the clan about you? The possibility instantly made his mind race. Muraken snorted at the worry and replied as if it were obvious. You're worrying over nothing. His tone made it sound like Jean was missing something simple. She's the one who gave you something that valuable, Muraken said. Would someone like that really expose your secret and leave you to die? Jean Runcandle looked momentarily speechless. Is that really how it is? He asked. Murakan answered with certainty. Yes. You can trust that sister of yours. Elsewhere, Luna Runcandle had sensed it as well. I'm certain of it, she thought quietly. That was a source of power I've never felt before. Then, as she considered the matter, another thought followed. My little brother is planning something. Meanwhile, Murakan took a bite of the cake Jean had brought and nearly looked ready to cry from pure delight. This is heavenly, he muttered, deeply moved by the taste. Jean Runcandle could only stare at him in speechless disbelief. Luna Runcandle continued her thoughts in silence. I should pretend I noticed nothing, she decided. Whatever secret Jean was carrying, she chose not to expose it. Just remember this one thing, Jean, my little brother, Luna Runcandle thought as she moved away. No matter what you choose to do, and no matter what you become, I will always stand on your side. It was a quiet vow, but a sincere one. The days Jean spent at Storm Castle, which he had once assumed would be nothing but dull and miserable, had unexpectedly given him many things. His father's recognition and expectations, the phoenix heart gifted to him by Mary Runcandle, his growing bond with Luna Runcandle, and even his meeting with Murakan, the dragon warrior. One by one, impossible things had entered his life and begun reshaping his future. These were blessings and opportunities he had not even dared dream about in his previous life. And now, at 10 years old, armed with strength far beyond before, Jean Runcandle was finally ready to leave Storm Castle behind and head for the main castle. There, people watched as two figures clashed in a fierce duel, the sharp sounds of combat cutting through the air with startling force. A massive impact followed, loud enough to shake the ground. Daytona Runcandle charged at his opponent like a wild beast, fast and aggressive, throwing his full weight into the attack without hesitation. He came on with the force of a furious animal, every movement fierce and direct, as if he intended to crush the other side head-on through sheer momentum. Their hands locked together in a contest of strength. Khan watched and thought to himself, as expected, no wonder he caught the master's attention. Even though Khan was supposed to be the one evaluating Jean during training, Jin's gaze often made it feel as though he were the one calmly judging Khan's ability as an instructor. Khan, let's stop here for today, Jean Runcandle said at last. There was no arrogance in his tone, but there was a strange confidence that made the words land with authority. All right, young Master Jean, Khan replied at once. Just then, someone suddenly called out from nearby, breaking the flow of the training ground's tension. Young Master Jean. Wiping the sweat from his face, Jean turned around and asked, What is it? Is there a problem with today's session? Khan lowered his head respectfully and said, It has been my greatest honor to teach you until now. You'll be leaving Storm Castle soon, but I promise I will do my utmost to guide you until the very last day. Jean Runcandle looked satisfied by that answer and gave a small nod. Good, he said. Then I'll continue to rely on you until the end. It was a short reply, but sincere enough to make Khan straighten with pride. Later, under the quiet flicker of candlelight, Jean Runcandle sat alone playing with fire in the dim room. The blue glow danced across his fingers, casting shifting shadows over his calm face. He passed his hand through the flames without the slightest fear of being burned. The fire licked against his skin like warm breath, but it did him no harm at all. Jean Runcandle gave a satisfied look, clearly pleased by how naturally he now handled it. Finally, he thought. Just then, someone called out, Young Master. It was Gilly McLaurin. She looked at the flames and immediately exclaimed, Oh my, isn't that hot? Jean answered shyly, almost as if it were nothing unusual. No, not really. It just feels like warm water. I'm relieved to see that Lady Mary's gift is finally starting to take effect. Gilly McLaurin spoke softly, her eyes fixed on Jean Runcandle with quiet amazement. I had only ever heard stories about the Phoenix Heart before this. Seeing its power with my own eyes like this, it really does feel unbelievable. It's truly miraculous, Jean Runcandle replied under his breath, sounding just as amazed. Then his expression slowly turned thoughtful and serious. He could already feel that he had absorbed about half of the medicine's power into his body. If things continued like this, he figured that in just a few more years, the entire effect would settle completely within him. Gilly McLaurin gave him a gentle smile before turning toward the door and stepping out of the room. We'll be leaving the castle early tomorrow morning, she said in a calm, caring voice. So if there's anything at all you need before then, Jean Runcandle, please tell me now. Okay, Jean Runcandle answered simply. As Gilly McLaurin moved to leave, her eyes suddenly landed on the strange books lying nearby, and she paused for a moment, clearly wondering about them. Gilly McLaurin spoke up at once. Young master, would you like me to pack these books too, Jean Runcandle? Jean Runcandle hesitated for a brief second before answering. Ah, yes. I think I'll read them in the carriage. Gilly McLaurin turned back toward him and nodded politely. Understood. Is there anything else you need, Jean Runcandle? Just those books will be enough, Jean Runcandle said. Gilly McLaurin murmured to herself as if already organizing everything in her head. Understood. Then I'll also prepare some strawberry shortcake for you to eat on the way, she added, sounding warm and attentive as always. Jean Runcandle stammered awkwardly, caught off guard by her kindness. That's fine. Gilly McLaurin, He trailed off, unable to finish the thought properly, as if something else was already pulling at his mind. I'm going out for a short walk. Gilly McLaurin looked genuinely surprised the moment she heard that. What? At this hour, Jean Runcandle? She asked, clearly not expecting him to leave so suddenly this late at night. I'm sorry. I'll be back soon, Jean Runcandle said before slipping away. Once outside, he cautiously peeked around and called in a lowered voice. Murakin? Murakin. A familiar voice answered almost immediately. Hey kid. So you came back. Jean Runcandle stepped closer and lowered his voice even more. You remember I'm leaving the castle tomorrow, right? Murakin answered as though that fact had been etched into his mind for ages. Of course I do. You have no idea how long I've been waiting for this day, Jean Runcandle. Jean Runcandle looked at him carefully and asked the practical question first. Then how exactly are you planning to follow me? Murakin looked absolutely delighted, almost offended that such a thing even needed to be asked. Don't make such a fuss over nothing. I'm the legendary Black Dragon, he said proudly. Even if I'm weaker than I used to be, this much is still easy. I'll take a route no one will notice, and I'll stay completely out of sight. Then Jean Runcandle's expression shifted, and he spoke more seriously. You've gotten weaker, Murakin. Why didn't you tell me something that important? Murakin let out a rough laugh. Hey, kid, after sleeping for so many years, how could I possibly still be perfectly fine? He shot back, as if the answer should have been obvious. Jean Runcandle kept staring at him for a moment before finally asking the question that mattered most. Then, can you recover your strength? Murakin answered without the slightest hesitation. Of course I can. And one day, you'll grow stronger than even I am, because I'm your guardian. His eyes gleamed with confidence as he continued. So hurry up and become a magic swordsman as soon as possible. That's the future you're meant for. Jean Runcandle fell silent for a moment, then asked, You once said that the Runcandle clan used to be a family of magic swordsmen, didn't you? There was clear curiosity in his voice now, mixed with the cautious weight of someone handling an old and dangerous truth. In truth, this was something Jean Runcandle had already heard from Soderette in his previous life. Even so, hearing it again now, in this moment, felt strangely different, as if the hidden pieces of the past were slowly beginning to line up before him. The Runcandle clan had originally been a clan of magic swordsmen, and its founding patriarch, Timar Runcandle, had been the greatest magic swordsman in history. It was not just an old legend or a half-forgotten myth, but a buried truth that very few people in the present era even knew still existed. Almost no one knew that truth anymore. Murakin replied in a low, steady voice. The reason the Runcandle family abandoned magic and chose to pursue only the peak of swordsmanship was because of an oath made 1,000 years ago. That single oath changed the entire direction of the clan's history. Well, even though I'm the clan's guardian, they'd probably be extremely annoyed if I suddenly showed myself now, Murakin said with a crooked smile. But if this were 1,000 years ago, both you and I would have been revered. They would have welcomed us as beings bringing the noblest power in the world back into existence. Jean Runcandle looked genuinely confused by that answer. The more he learned, the more it felt as if the truth behind the Runcandle family was far deeper and stranger than he had ever imagined. The Runcandles really would, Murakin said with a bright, almost playful smile. Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Then he waved the thought away. Anyway, I'll hide myself properly, so don't worry about me. Jean Runcandle. After a brief pause, Jean Runcandle gave a small nod. All right. Then what are you going to do about that? Jean Runcandle asked, glancing toward the issue that still bothered him. If someone goes into the library and suddenly finds nothing there, they're bound to realize something is wrong. Murakin answered with casual confidence. I can cover it with dragon magic and leave behind illusions, he said. Even so, Jean Runcandle still looked uneasy, the worry clear in his eyes despite Murakin's calm tone. And what if even those illusions are discovered? Jean Runcandle pressed. Murakin immediately looked offended, almost irritated that his ability was being doubted. Hey, I'm a shadow dragon, he snapped back with pride. You know, things like illusions are child's play for me. Murakin continued, sounding far more smug now. So stop worrying so much. That part, at least, is easy. But like I said before, I still haven't fully recovered my strength, he added in a more serious voice. So the illusion probably won't last forever. There's a limit to how long I can keep it stable in my current state. Murakin's expression turned solemn as he went on. Still, I'll hold it together for as long as I possibly can, at least until my strength fully returns. So don't concern yourself with it too much. Just focus on your own path and go without looking back. All right. Thank you, Jean Runcandle said sincerely. Murakin looked unexpectedly touched by the gratitude. I'd appreciate it if you showed me a little more respect once in a while, considering how kind and dependable I am, he muttered. Jean Runcandle fumbled awkwardly before changing the subject. Actually, I brought something special today. Murakin blinked, instantly curious. Something special? Murakin repeated. Jean Runcandle nodded and answered. A cake made from the first strawberries of the season, and some wine I brewed myself. There was a faint hint of pride in his voice, as if he had prepared it with more care than he wanted to admit. Murakin's eyes widened in surprise. What? Jean Runcandle quickly warned him. Just don't get drunk and start making weird illusions again. But Murakin was already acting like an overexcited child. You brought me that? You really are a good little boy. Raising you clearly wasn't a waste of effort. Then, grinning mischievously, he added, So when are you going to introduce me to your nanny? Jean Runcandle hesitated, clearly unwilling to answer right away. I'll think about it. Gilly McLaurin spoke carefully, her tone unusually serious. Young master, you can't expect life there to be comfortable. Things are not going to be easy once we arrive. It was the same at Storm Castle, and it will be the same at the main castle, she continued. Of course, you've already trained incredibly hard, and I know better than anyone how much you've endured. But once you reach the main castle, it will be even harsher than before, and your days will be far busier. I won't be able to make you cake whenever you want anymore. Jean Runcandle gently tried to reassure her. Don't worry. I know that already. I'll do my best at the main castle too. Hearing that, Gilly McLaurin knelt before him and placed a hand over her chest with solemn sincerity. Yes, and I will continue to devote myself to serving you with everything I have. At that moment, someone's voice rang out from outside. Young master. The two knights standing there spoke in unison with disciplined precision. Knight guards Jerome and hoses greet young master Jean Runcandle. We will escort you safely to the Garden of Swords. All right, Jean Runcandle answered calmly. I'll leave it to you then. His voice was composed, but beneath it lay the quiet tension of someone stepping into a new chapter of his life. Let's go. The group finally set out on October 30th, 1790. At last, Jean Runcandle was leaving the castle behind. As the horse's hooves rang sharply through the cold air and echoed up into the open sky, a new journey began, one that would lead him toward the main domain of the Runcandle clan. The Garden of Swords. The name alone carried weight, history, and the promise of trials that would change everything from this point forward. As the carriage gradually picked up speed, Gilly McLaurin sat inside and looked out through the window. The landscape beyond had already begun to fade into a pale, wintry haze. It's snowing, she said, her voice edged with concern. At this rate, the road will probably be blocked very soon. We may need to stop at a village nearby and wait until the snowfall dies down a little. Jean Runcandle answered in a surprisingly cheerful tone, perhaps trying to keep the mood light. If the snow gets too heavy, we won't even be able to use the teleportation gate. Even spoken lightly, it was a real concern. All right. But almost as soon as the words left them, the carriage lurched violently. The sudden impact threw both of them off balance. Gilly McLaurin immediately reached toward him in alarm and cried out, "Young master!" At the same time, a knight outside shouted, "Ambush! Please remain inside the carriage." Gilly McLaurin pulled Jean Runcandle close and tried to calm him despite the danger crashing in all around them. "Young master, don't worry," she whispered urgently, holding him protectively. "It will be all right. Jerome and Hoses are 7-star guards, and I'm here too." But then the noise outside sharpened into killing intent. "The assassins, take them down." The atmosphere around the carriage turned brutal in an instant, thick with the certainty of bloodshed. Gilly McLaurin fell silent for a brief moment, focusing as she assessed the situation. Then she spoke in a low, controlled voice. "There are around 20 enemies. They seem to include both mages and warriors, and there are probably archers mixed in as well. Still, none of them appear to be above 7-star level. Jerome and Hoses are holding them back for now." The moment he heard that, Jean Runcandle's expression changed completely. Instead of relief, disbelief flashed across his face. Then he shouted, "Gilly McLaurin, we need to get out of here right now." Gilly McLaurin stared at him in confusion. "What do you mean?" Jean Runcandle answered with sharp urgency. "Think about it seriously. Under no circumstances are the guards of Runcandle allowed to neglect the protection of Runcandle's direct bloodline. One of them should have remained at my side no matter what happened." The moment those words sank in, Gilly McLaurin's eyes widened as she realized the same terrifying possibility. "So you mean, one of them is a traitor, or someone is pretending to be them?" Gilly McLaurin asked in a tense voice. Jean Runcandle answered immediately, his gaze hard and certain. "That's right. There has to be a weapon somewhere inside this carriage," Jean Runcandle said sharply, his mind already racing ahead of the chaos outside. "We can't stay trapped in here any longer. We have to get out now, Gilly McLaurin." Gilly McLaurin's face hardened with anger, not at him, but at the danger closing in around them. "I understand, young master," she answered without hesitation, her voice tight and steady. Then Gilly McLaurin summoned her weapon, her tone turning solemn and unwavering. "I will protect you as a member of the Runcandle clan," she declared. "And if I overstep my place in doing so, then please forgive me afterward." The next instant, Gilly McLaurin rushed out of the carriage, moving without the slightest fear. "Young master, when we return to the castle, I will willingly accept whatever punishment comes," she said. Jean Runcandle immediately cut her off. "This is not the time to talk about that. Let's go to them," Jean Runcandle said as he moved to follow. Gilly McLaurin glanced at him in confusion, clearly thrown off by his calm certainty even in the middle of an ambush. "Confirm what?" Gilly McLaurin asked quickly. Jean Runcandle answered at once, his eyes fixed on the fight ahead. "The people they're fighting, there's a chance they might actually be on our side. If those people had truly come here to kill me, they would have attacked the moment I stepped out of the carriage like this," Jean Runcandle said, his voice low and analytical. "But it's strangely quiet. That silence itself feels wrong." Gilly McLaurin understood almost immediately. The moment his reasoning clicked into place, her expression changed, and the confusion in her eyes gave way to sharp alertness. "I see." Before she could finish, a shout tore through the battlefield. "Go find Jean Runcandle. Team 3, block the left wing." The voice rang out with urgency, cutting through the clash of steel and snow. Just as Jean Runcandle expected, Gilly McLaurin noticed it too. The symbols they carried were unmistakable. One belonged to the Demon Crest, and the other to the Black King insignia. The Mel Magic Clan and the Black King Mercenary Squad. Those names alone were enough to shift the meaning of the battle entirely, turning what first looked like an attack into something far more complicated. From across the battlefield, a person in a white cloak shouted loudly, "We found Gilly McLaurin, and Jean Runcandle too." His voice carried over the snow and confusion with unmistakable relief. The surrounding fighters immediately raised their voices together. Everyone prioritized protecting Runcandle. Their chant was loud, urgent, and disciplined, leaving little doubt about their real objective. Then a red-haired man stepped forward and introduced himself clearly. I am Mara, captain of the Black King Squad. We came here under the orders of the Runcandle family to rescue Jean Runcandle. His voice was direct, leaving no room for hesitation. Nearby, Murakin ground his teeth in fury. Damn you, he muttered darkly. How dare you lay a hand on the young master? Even with his presence concealed, his anger was raw and immediate. Jean Runcandle narrowed his eyes and thought to himself, they're imposters after all. If those two were really 7-star guards, there's no way they would be struggling this badly against opponents like these. The mismatch was too obvious to ignore. In the middle of all that confusion, the two imposters found themselves completely surrounded. Every route of escape was cut off, and the pressure closing in around them grew heavier by the second. Gilly McLaurin stepped forward and shouted, Who are you? What is your purpose here? And whose dogs are you working for? Her voice cracked through the air like a blade, sharp and merciless. The bald-headed man only smirked in response, as if he found the question ridiculous. There was open contempt in his face, and not even a trace of fear. What a stupid question, you bitch, he spat. Who has the time to answer the dogs of the Runcandle family? His voice dripped with hatred, making his allegiance obvious even before he said another word. Gilly McLaurin went silent for a brief moment, then turned toward Jean Runcandle and asked, What should we do, young master? Even now, with blood already on the ground, she waited for his command. Jean Runcandle answered in a cold, cutting voice. Kill one of them. Cut off the other one's hand, and bring him to me. His order came without hesitation, as sharp and final as a drawn blade. The instant she heard the command, Gilly McLaurin bowed slightly. As you command, she said, and then she vanished forward in a blur. The bald man had no idea what was happening until it was already too late. Gilly McLaurin's eyes turned brutally cold as she closed the distance. There was no warmth left in them now, only the clean, ruthless focus of someone carrying out an execution. With a wet, slicing sound like a knife cutting through a watermelon, her strike landed. The white-haired man, witnessing it from only a few steps away, recoiled in shock as he watched his companion being cut apart as easily as a piece of fruit. The sight was so sudden and so grotesquely clean that for a moment, he could do nothing but stare in horror. But before he could even turn and run, another slash flashed through the air and tore into his arm. It was so fast that his body registered the hit before his mind could catch up. The man stood there in stunned silence, hearing only the whistle of the blade passing by. For one frozen second, everything around him seemed to go quiet. Then his blood burst outward in a violent spray. The delayed pain hit him all at once, and his face twisted as panic finally caught up with reality. Gilly McLaurin narrowed her eyes as she watched him stagger. Her expression remained steady, controlled, and chillingly calm, as though this outcome had been decided from the very start. To the man, she looked terrifying. Before he could gather himself, a crushing kick slammed into him with overwhelming force and sent him crashing hard to the ground. Only then did the sharpness in Gilly McLaurin's gaze soften a little. The fury had not disappeared, but now it was restrained, carefully measured for what came next. She calmly grabbed the white-haired man by the hair and dragged him across the ground toward Jean Runcandle. Your master seems to have badly underestimated his opponent, she said. To serve the Runcandle family directly, one must be at least a 7-star knight. Jean Runcandle looked down at the captive with a cold expression. So if you want to assassinate a child of the Runcandle family, he said, you should at least bring someone at the 8-star level. The white-haired man screamed hysterically, half in rage and half in pain. Stop talking nonsense. This is only the beginning. The Runcandle family is heading toward its doom. His voice cracked with manic hatred. Jean Runcandle answered softly, almost lazily. I wish that were true. The calmness of that sentence made Murakin, who stood hidden beside him, freeze for a brief second in surprise. Jean Runcandle continued inwardly. I have no interest in the Runcandle Empire itself. The only thing I care about is the future of Jean Runcandle. It was a cold, private thought, stripped of loyalty to anyone but himself. The white-haired man clearly had not expected to meet someone like this. He had probably imagined a frightened child, not a boy whose composure felt more dangerous than a drawn sword. Bow your head, the white-haired man shouted, trying to force out one last burst of defiance. Let's go. But the words came out broken and desperate, more like a cornered animal's cry than a threat. At that moment, Jean Runcandle recalled the name Zipple, the famous wizard family that ruled the other half of the world. The pieces in his mind began to connect one by one. Zipple. If the Runcandle clan was renowned for reaching the highest peak of swordsmanship, then the Zipple clan was known for standing at the pinnacle of magic. Long ago, after the founder of the Runcandle family passed away, a humiliating oath was forced into place, one that demanded magic be stripped away from Runcandle. From that day on, magic and Runcandle were severed from each other, sealed apart by history and shame. That was why, to the Runcandle clan, the Zipple clan had remained a sworn enemy for 1,000 years. No wonder, Jean Runcandle thought. I was wondering who would dare act with this kind of arrogance. So, it's a believer of the Zipple clan, Jean Runcandle said with a faint sneer. Then he turned to Gilly McLaurin. Take him and dump him somewhere. There's no need to keep looking at his face. Interrogating him won't get us anything, he added. Gilly McLaurin bowed her head and answered, As you command. The white-haired man immediately cursed through clenched teeth. You bastard. Of course, Jean Runcandle thought, to the Zipple clan, the Runcandle clan is a sworn enemy as well. The hatred between the two families ran both ways, old as history itself. Just kill me already, the white-haired man barked, unable to bear the humiliation any longer. Jean Runcandle ignored the outburst and continued thinking. They have always looked for chances to terrorize Runcandle. Even so, this incident was probably not ordered directly by the Zipple clan itself. More likely, these believers had acted on their own, driven by fanatic loyalty rather than official command. Strange. No matter how skilled someone may be at disguising themselves, fooling a true 7-star knight shouldn't be easy. The more Jean Runcandle thought about it, the more unnatural the whole situation felt. Don't tell me he's involved in this. As that suspicion settled in his mind, Gilly McLaurin stepped forward and respectfully bowed with one hand over her chest. Young master, I have done as you instructed. Jean Runcandle crossed his arms and replied, Thank you, Gilly McLaurin. Jean Runcandle stepped forward and looked directly at Mara before speaking. You said you're the captain of the Black King squad, right? Mara gave a quick, respectful nod. Yes, sir. Jean Runcandle studied him calmly, his gaze steady and unreadable. I was able to escape safely because you drew their attention away from me when I returned to the Runcandle castle, Jean Runcandle said in an even voice. I'll make sure your contribution is reported properly. You will be rewarded well for it. For now, help me prepare the teleportation gate. Mara placed a hand over his chest and bowed without delay. I will do everything I can, he replied firmly, his tone carrying both discipline and sincerity. As he straightened, Mara could not hide the disbelief in his eyes. A child of the Runcandle family. How could someone like him move around outside the castle for so long and still remain this composed? The thought lingered heavily in his mind. He's only 10 years old, Mara thought, and yet he already carries himself with this much confidence and maturity. It was not normal, not even for a gifted noble child. The more Mara looked at Jean Runcandle, the more unsettled and impressed he became. Then Mara remembered what Jean Runcandle had said earlier and the confidence in his expression when he said it. I am searching for the path that will bring in the era of Jean Runcandle. Mara realized those had not been the meaningless words of a child showing off. Jean Runcandle had been completely serious.